Ladies and gentlemen, the Imperial Cornet Band performs music from the World War I era, including pieces by Sousa, Irving Berlin, and others, as well as selections written and performed by James Reese, Europe of the 369th Infantry Regiment Band, the Harlem Hellfighters.
Right.
Their programs give audiences a chance to hear what this music sounded like performed by a small regimental band. The Imperial Cornet Band performs under the auspices of the Maryland Military Band and is conducted by Yari Villanueva. Please help me welcome to the Northfield Vintage Band Festival stage, the Imperial Cornet Band.
Thank you very much. Much taller person, must have been tall. There we go. Well, good afternoon. We are the Imperial Cornet Band from Baltimore, Maryland, part subgroup of the Maryland Military Band. Our program this afternoon will include music heard during World War I. That first piece of music, of course, very familiar, written by George M. Cohan, the great songwriter, lyricist, Broadway producer, and just a little bit of everything. He was the man who owned Broadway, and he penned that tune, which was probably the most iconic song of World War I. It eventually garnered him a Congressional Gold Medal that was awarded to him by President Franklin Roosevelt in 1940. Another composer at this time was Irving Berlin. Now, Irving Berlin had come over from Russia, worked in Tin Pan Alley, had written some great music, and also became an American citizen. Because he was a citizen in 1917, he was drafted into the United States Army. And he was sent as a private to Camp Upton, which was in New York, on Long Island. And the Army, in its infinite wisdom, of course, knowing that they had a great songwriter and lyricist in Irving Berlin, made him a cook. But he was able to convince the camp commander to let him write a show, which for the troops, which was called Yip Yip Yap Hank. Yap Hank being the closest town in New York where the Camp Upton was located. The show itself included two great songs. The first one was that great song about murdering buglers, like how I hate to get up in the morning. And the second one was a song that was really not so much associated with World War I as it was with World War II. God Bless America. Most people think that Kate Smith came up with that song prior to World War II. Well, actually, it was written in 1918, but never performed, and Berlin put it into his trunk with other pieces of music. 20 years later, it becomes a great hit. Well, we're going to play probably one of the most popular tunes that Berlin wrote during this time period. This is Alexander's Ragtime Band. Thank you. Alexander's Ragtime Band. Ragtime music in the United States sort of came to an end during World War I. In April of 1917, we saw the death of Scott Joplin, who was America's greatest ragtime composer. He passed away, but there were other composers who were writing ragtime compositions, and one of them has a great Baltimore connection. This next piece of music that we're going to play for you was written by a pianist and composer by the name of James Hubert Blake, better known as Eubie Blake. And Eubie Blake was quite the composer around the same time as Joplin, probably not as well known, but he was doing it. And he continued writing music all the way up to the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And one of my great claims to fame is that I actually had dinner with Eubie Blake in the 1970s when he came to Peabody Conservatory for a program. And his fingers were incredible. They're incredibly long, and he still could play great ragtime music. We're going to play a piece of music right now he wrote called Fizzwater, and it will feature our drummer as it employs some great little techniques like the bottle opening of champagne, hence the name Fizzwater. Great tune by Eubie Blake, Fizzwater. our drummer, John Crocken. We're going to play the work of another African-American composer who lived during the early part of the 20th century, and his name was James Reese Europe. And James Reese Europe was a social band director in the New York area. He had been born in Alabama, but had moved up to seek his fame and fortune in the New York area. He, along with other black musicians at the time, formed their own union and their own working guild, because there was such a strong segregation of musicians happening at that time. It was very tough for black musicians to get work, so a lot of them created their own within their own unions and stuff. And James Reese Europe had a great social orchestra going and became so popular that he was approached by a dance team, the Castles, Irene and Vernon Castle. And both of those dancers, by the way, were white dancers, and they had been sensational dancers and had revolutionized dance styles in the early part of the 20th century. Well, they liked Europe's music so much, they incorporated it into their dance routines. And we'd like to play an example of one of those pieces right now. This is a piece written by James Reese Europe called The Castle House Rag. Thank you, some great music. Now we're going to turn now to another African-American composer at that time, W.C. Handy. And W.C. Handy, of course, was known as Father of the Blues. The next piece, the St. Louis Blues, which is probably his most famous piece today, we're going to play an arrangement that was played by and recorded by James Reese Europe. Now, a little bit about James Reese Europe and his connection with World War I. When America entered the war in April of 1917, the United States, of course, began a great mobilization where up to 4 million men would eventually go into uniform. Well, there were large numbers of African Americans who also wanted to participate in the war. They wanted to show their mettle, as it, so to speak. There were African American regiments to be found in New York. The biggest one was the 15th New York Regiment. They were made up of soldiers from the Harlem district in New York City. And they brought as their band leader and bandmaster James Reese Europe, who put together a band for that unit. When they went to train and become federalized, their designation changed to the 369th Infantry Regiment. And they were among the first black troops to be sent over to France in early 1918. And at first, a lot of these black troops were not allowed to engage in combat, rather they were put into other duties. However, the 369th was put under French command, and they were actually sent into battle. The French really were impressed by these warriors, so much so that by the end of the war, the 369th was awarded the French Croix de Guerre, the highest medal allowed by the French. Well, this great band that went along with them was made up of African American musicians from Harlem. Also, James Reese Europe had gone down to the Caribbean to hire some musicians, bring them back, and form this great band. The arrangement of St. Louis Blues we're going to play for you right now doesn't sound like maybe the arrangement you might be familiar with like the Glenn Miller version or any other jazzy type. This arrangement was done by another great African-American composer, William Grant Still, who in his 1920s was working for publishing companies as an arranger. So the arrangement that this band recorded was the arrangement done by William Grant Still. It does have some great jazzy overtones to it. I hope you enjoy it. This is St. Louis Blues, written by W.C. Handy, as performed by the 369th Regimental Band. Well, by the time America did enter the war in 1917, the war in Europe had been going on for 3 years. And there had been a lot of great music that was written, both in France and England. And a lot of that music was to eventually make its way to the United States and become popular with many groups. And we're going to play a medley right now of 2 tunes that were popular in England, but made their way over to the United States and very familiar with everyone here, I'm sure. The first one is called It's a Long, Long Way to Tipperary. The second one is Pack Up Your Troubles in Your Old Kit Bag and, yeah, some folks got it, Smile, Smile, Smile. Two great tunes, and the arrangement you're about to hear incorporates those 2 tunes. And you'll hear the verse to each one of these tunes, something that's rarely done in performances. And also, I've decided with this arrangement to throw in a British bugle call of Fall In. And then, because I'm an arranger and I like to do crazy stuff, as we get to the final shout chorus of this arrangement, you'll hear both tunes on top of each other. So here is our arrangement of It's a Long, Long Way to Tipperary and Pack Up Your Troubles in Your Old Kit Bag. Thank you, lots of fun with that one. We're going to slow things down a little bit and play yet another medley. Reason we decided to do a lot of these medleys is because there's just so much music that was written during the wartime. Songwriters were quite busy in Tin Pan Alley during that time, churning out dozens of tunes daily. This is a medley we call For the Roses, and it consists of 4 ballads. First one being My Belgium Rose. The second one, The Rose of No Man's Land, which was a tribute to the nurses of World War I. The third one is The Roses of Picardy, and then the last one is Homeward Bound, a medley called For the Roses. Thank you. Some really nice, slow tunes on a great summer afternoon here in Northfield, Minnesota. Our next piece of music is another piece that comes from the recordings of the 369th Regimental Band, the Harlem Hellfighters. And as I mentioned before, they were among the first troops to arrive in France in early 1918. And the band, which James Reese Europe was leading at that time, The first thing they did when they got off the boats was to play a jazzy version of La Marseillaise, which, to the delight of all the French citizens. The band was to spend the next almost year performing all around France, playing concerts for the troops, playing for the citizens, playing up near the front lines, playing at hospitals, playing for the big brass, so to speak. Pershing, by the way, General Pershing, who was the overall commander, loved military music and he loved bands. In fact, if there was any one great proponent of military music during World War I, it was General Pershing. He authorized having as many bands as possible over in the European theater. There were, by his counting, over 200 regimental bands that were sent to France. And on top of that, there were 27 African-American regimental bands that were sent, something that's not so well known. Some research is now starting to happen on those great bands. The one thing about those groups is that very few of them recorded, and we were very fortunate that the 369th band was able to record a lot of music. And this is one of the pieces that they recorded. This is a novelty piece that features our trombone, sort of a comic one-step, sort of almost circus type music as it were, called That Moaning Trombone, featuring our trombonist, Mr. Jarrett Denhart. Oh man. One, two, two. Jarrett Denhart on the trombone. Jarrett. Now, if you can imagine 4 trombone players in that band all doing that, what a great sound. And the recordings of that band are available. It's very easy to find, the 369th Infantry Regiment Band. Our next piece is going to be yet another selection taken from the recordings, those early recordings. This is another one of W.C. Handy's compositions, the father of the blues, composer of St. Louis blues. This is called the Memphis Blues. And this piece actually was one of the most requested pieces by the band while they were in Europe. We were not able to find an arrangement of it. the thought is that it may have been one of those pieces that was arranged by William Grant Still for the band, but we've not been able to find it. However, I have a friend in New York City who loves this type of music and transcribes music off of old recordings. This fella is a bass player, of all things, in the New York Metropolitan Opera and Ballet Companies, but loves doing this sort of stuff. So I asked him, and he sat, listened to the recording, and came up with a great transcription of this. By the way, his name is Ron Wasserman, so if you're listening, Ron, thanks so much for this great transcription. This is the Memphis Blues as recorded by the 369th Harlem Hellfighters Band. Thank you so much. We're about to play our last number, but before we do, we'd like to thank, first of all, thank you all for coming here and supporting this great event, the Vintage Band Festival. Hopefully, maybe this will become a yearly tradition and draw a lot of great folks to this just really wonderful town. And it's so nice that the weather has cooperated with us for this weekend. I remember coming here in 2013, and it was 95 degrees, heat wave, but we all survived and we decided to come back and wear wool again. having a lot of fun. I'd also like to thank my good friend Paul Nemisto for having us. I get to play in his terrific group, American Poyat, every so often. I know that everyone can tell by my accent that I'm a Finn. I was actually born in Finland, but I was dragged over here when I was just a little kid. But it's so nice to play some of that great Finnish music. We're going to end our concert today with music by a composer who's probably not so well associated or known with World War I, and that's John Philip Sousa. John Philip Sousa, of course, the March King, who had started his career in the United States Marines as an apprentice musician when he was 13, became the leader of the United States Marine Band in 1880 when he was 25 years old, then left 12 years later to form his great touring band, the band that toured throughout the nation and also toured internationally. Well, you know, Sousa had always had a place for the military and the training of musicians, so much so that he, in later years, would testify before Congress in trying to get the rank of officers for band leaders, because usually the band leaders at that time were just non-commissioned officers. But Sousa sought out and received a commission in the United States Navy in 1917. So he left his very lucrative career of conducting his band, traveling all over the world, making hundreds of $1,000s, so he could go to work for Uncle Sam for the great total sum of $1 a month. And boy, he said the money kept rolling in. He would train 300 musicians, naval musicians, at Great Lakes Training Center in Great Lakes, Illinois, and lead the famous Jackie Band around the country on Liberty Loan tours, serving his country. He loved it so much that for the rest of his life, after World War I, he would wear his naval uniform. And he was promoted, by the way, right afterwards. He was promoted to the rank of lieutenant commander in the United States Naval Reserve, proudly wearing that uniform for the rest of his life, and even when he passed away, was buried in that uniform. So we're going to end with a piece of music that he wrote during World War I. He wrote many pieces: the U.S. Field Artillery March, Saber and Spurs, Solid Men to the Front, and this great piece in honor of the Naval Reserve, appropriately enough called the Naval Reserve March, which is based on a tune that he had written before called Blue Ridge. You'll hear some bugle calls, and then the last portion of the tune is this wonderful tune that he wrote with the lyrics going something like, Blue Ridge, I hear the bugles call. And it's a song about the loneliness of soldiers and, of course, their desire to come home. So thanks for having us. This is the Naval Reserve March by John Philip Sousa.
played with the American Cornet?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Oh. Oh, no kidding. If you could hang on 1 second, let me just finish that.